The abandoned mining station sat hunched against the rocky hillside like a wounded animal. Inside, two Navajo brothers were bound with thick rope to iron support beams. Keem, the elder brother, his broad chest marked with bruises and dirt, kept his jaw set firm even as pain burned through him. Ahiga, younger by 3 years, fought to keep his breathing steady, though terror clouded his dark eyes. Before them, Garrett and his partner Denton circled like vultures, their faces twisted into expressions of cruelty that seemed carved into their very bones. "Hand over the deed or your brother suffers," Garrett spat, shoving Ahiga's head back against the beam. The younger man gasped, fighting against the rope cutting into his wrists. Keem's eyes blazed with defiance, but his voice cracked when he finally spoke. "The land is not mine to give. It belongs to our people. You know this." Denton laughed, a sound like gravel scraping metal. "Then I guess we will just have to persuade you another way." He drew a hunting knife from his belt, the blade catching the dim light filtering through broken boards. On the trail below, Sarah Brennan pulled her horse to a stop. The former schoolteacher from Pennsylvania had come west after losing her husband to consumption, seeking a new start in territory that did not remind her of everything she had buried. Her auburn hair was tied back beneath a wide-brimmed hat, and though she wore a simple traveling dress, she kept a small derringer hidden in her boot. At 32 years old, she had learned that the frontier demanded more than book learning and proper manners. A cry cut through the evening air. Sarah stiffened in her saddle, every instinct telling her to ride on, to not involve herself in troubles that were not her own. She had made that mistake before, back in Philadelphia, speaking up for a servant girl being mistreated by her employer. It had cost Sarah her position at the academy, had cost her respectability. But when the second cry came, younger and more desperate, she could not make her hands pull the reins away. She dismounted, tied her mare to a scrub pine, and approached the mining station on foot. Through a gap in the weathered planks, she saw them. 2 native men bound and bleeding, 2 white men circling with weapons drawn. Her heart hammered against her ribs. This was not her fight. These were not her people. She was alone, miles from the nearest town, and what could one woman do against armed men? But then she remembered the girl in Philadelphia, remembered the shame that had eaten at her for months after she had finally left, knowing she had not done enough. Her hand moved to the derringer in her boot even as her mind screamed that this was madness. Inside, Garrett pressed the knife to Ahiga's throat. "Your brother has until I count to 10. Keem thrashed against his bonds, blood running from where the rope had cut through skin. "Stop. Stop, I will sign. I will give you what you want." His voice broke on the last word, and Ahiga closed his eyes, tears streaming down his face. The door exploded inward with a crash that made everyone freeze. Sarah stood in the doorway, the derringer held in both hands, aimed at Garrett's chest. Her voice came out steadier than she felt. "Step away from them. Now." For a moment, nobody moved. Then Denton started to laugh. "A woman? You brought a woman to save you?" He took a step toward her. Sarah shifted her aim and fired. The bullet took a chunk out of the doorframe beside Denton's head, showering him with splinters. The laughter died. "I have 1 shot left," she said, her voice cold now, controlled. "And at this range, I will not miss. Who wants to test me?" Garrett's face went purple with rage. "You have no right to interfere. This is business between us and these savages." He still held the knife to Ahiga's throat. Sarah felt her hands begin to shake, but she forced them still. "I have every right to stop a murder. Let them go or I swear before God I will put this bullet through your eye." The standoff stretched like wire about to snap. Then Denton moved, lunging for a rifle leaning against the wall. Sarah turned and fired, the derringers cracked sharp in the enclosed space. The bullet caught Denton in the shoulder, spinning him around. He fell, cursing, clutching at the wound. Garrett released Ahiga and charged at Sarah, knife raised. She had no more bullets, no more tricks. She threw the useless derringer at his face and dove to the side. Her hands found a piece of broken timber and she swung it with all her strength, connecting with Garrett's knee. He stumbled, and in that moment, Keem wrenched one arm free from the loosened rope. He grabbed a heavy chain from the floor and swung it, catching Garrett across the temple. The man dropped like a stone. Silence fell, broken only by heavy breathing and Denton's moaning. Sarah scrambled to her feet, grabbed the knife Garrett had dropped, and cut through the ropes binding the two brothers. Ahiga collapsed to his knees, coughing. Keem steadied himself against the beam, his eyes meeting Sarah's. "Why did you help us? You do not know us." Sarah looked at the knife in her hand, then at the two men she had shot and struck down to save two strangers. Her voice came out barely above a whisper. "Because someone had to." She looked back at Keem, at the blood and bruises, at the exhaustion in his eyes. "Because if I had ridden past, I would have spent the rest of my life hearing those cries." Keem nodded slowly. "We need to leave. There will be more coming. Garrett has friends in the marshal's office." Sarah felt ice settle in her stomach. "Then I have just made myself an outlaw for helping you." Keem's expression softened slightly. "Then you cannot stay here either. Come with us. Our people will give you sanctuary." They moved quickly, Sarah retrieving her horse while Keem and Ahiga found their own mounts hidden in a ravine nearby. As they rode into the gathering darkness, Sarah cast one look back at the mining station, at the life she had just left behind. There was no going back now. She had crossed a line that could not be uncrossed. The ride to the Navajo settlement took most of the night. They followed paths that seemed invisible to Sarah's eyes, winding through canyons and across dry creek beds. Keem led, constantly scanning the horizon. Ahiga rode close to Sarah, occasionally glancing at her with a mixture of gratitude and curiosity. Finally, as dawn began to paint the sky purple and gold, they crested a rise and Sarah saw the settlement spread out below. It was larger than she had expected, dozens of hogans arranged in a loose circle, with larger structures for communal gathering. Smoke rose from morning fires, and the sound of voices drifted up to them. Keem turned in his saddle. "You will not be welcomed easily. Our people have learned to distrust whites, and with good reason. But you saved our lives. I will speak for you." They rode down into the settlement, and heads turned to watch their approach. An older woman, her hair silver and bound in traditional style, stepped forward. Her face was weathered by decades of sun and wind, but her eyes were sharp as flint. She spoke rapidly in Navajo, her tone demanding answers. Keem dismounted and responded in their language, gesturing to Sarah and Ahiga. The conversation went on for several minutes, with more people gathering to listen. Sarah remained on her horse, feeling the weight of dozens of eyes upon her. She had never felt more out of place, more aware of her pale skin and foreign dress. Finally, the older woman approached her and spoke in English. "I am Desba. Keem tells me you risked your life to save my grandsons." She studied Sarah with an intensity that made the younger woman feel transparent. "Why would you do this?" Sarah met her gaze steadily. "Because they needed help and I was there. It is not more complicated than that." Desba's expression did not change, but something flickered in her eyes. "You have made enemies of dangerous men. Garrett has the marshal in his pocket, and they will come looking for you. By sheltering you, we put our people at risk." Sarah felt her chest tighten, but she kept her voice level. "Then I will not ask you to take that risk. I can leave." "No," Keem said, stepping forward. "She stays. She bled for us, she cannot face Garrett's revenge alone. It is our responsibility now." Desba looked between her grandson and Sarah, then sighed. "Very well. But she must learn our ways if she is to stay. She cannot remain apart." Sarah dismounted, her legs shaking from exhaustion and nerves. "I will do whatever is needed." I am grateful for your protection. The first days were harder than anything Sarah had experienced. She was given a small hogan on the edge of the settlement, sparse and unfamiliar. The food was different, the language incomprehensible, the customs mysterious. Children stared at her openly, some giggling, others wary. Many of the adults simply ignored her, treating her as if she were invisible. But Ahiga brought her water each morning, teaching her the Navajo words for basic things. Cup. Water. Thank you. Fire. His patience was infinite, and gradually Sarah began to piece together simple phrases. Keem kept his distance, but she would see him watching sometimes, his expression unreadable. A week after her arrival, Desba came to Sarah's hogan at dawn. You cannot stay idle. In our community, everyone contributes. You will work with the women preparing hides. Sarah followed her to where a group of women worked, scraping and treating animal skins. The work was backbreaking, and her soft hands blistered within hours. The other women spoke around her but not to her, communicating in rapid Navajo that Sarah could barely follow. By midday, her back ached and her hands bled. One of the younger women, noticing, brought her strips of cloth to wrap her palms. The woman did not speak, but her eyes were not unkind. Sarah nodded her thanks and returned to work, determined not to show weakness. That evening, Keem found her sitting outside her hogan, trying to clean her blistered hands in a basin of water. He crouched beside her, taking one of her hands in his. His calloused fingers were gentle as he examined the damage. You are not used to this kind of work. Sarah tried to pull her hand back, embarrassed. I will learn. I will not be a burden. Keem held on, meeting her eyes. I know. You have the spirit of a warrior. I saw it when you faced Garrett. But spirit alone does not prevent infection. Wait here. He returned with a clay pot containing a salve that smelled of herbs and grease. As he carefully applied it to her blistered palms, Sarah studied his face. He was perhaps 30 years old, with strong features and black hair that fell past his shoulders. A scar ran along his left cheekbone, pale against his bronze skin. His hands, so capable of violence when needed, were surprisingly gentle now. Thank you, she said quietly. For everything. For speaking for me with your grandmother. For letting me stay. Keem did not look up from his work. You saved my brother's life. Mine too. This is the least I can do. He finished wrapping her hands and sat back. But Sarah, you need to understand something. This cannot last forever. Garrett will not stop looking for you. And when he finds out you are here, he will come. We will need to be ready. Sarah felt cold despite the warm evening air. What will they do? Keem's expression hardened. They will try to force us to hand you over. They will threaten to bring the army, to burn our homes. They have done it before. Sarah's stomach turned. Then I should leave. I cannot let your people suffer because of me. Keem reached out and gripped her shoulder, his eyes fierce. You are not leaving. We will stand together. That is our way. She wanted to argue, to insist that she would not let others pay for her actions, but the determination in his face stopped her. Instead, she nodded, feeling something shift between them, a bond being forged in shared danger. The weeks passed, and summer deepened its hold on the land. The sun beat down mercilessly, turning the earth to iron beneath their feet. Sarah's hands healed and hardened. She learned to work hides properly, to gather water from distant springs, to prepare food in the Navajo style. Her skin darkened under the relentless sun, and she abandoned her traveling dress for simpler clothing more suited to the work. Ahiga became her constant companion and teacher. At 23, he was bright and curious, eager to practice his English with her while teaching her Navajo in return. He told her stories of his people, of their history and beliefs, of the forced relocation his grandparents had survived decades before. Sarah, In turn, told him of her life back east, of her late husband and the schools where she had taught, of the books she had loved and left behind. But it was Keem who occupied her thoughts more and more. She would catch herself watching him as he worked with the horses, as he spoke with the elders, as he taught the young men to track and hunt. There was a quiet strength to him, a deep sense of responsibility that he carried in every action. And sometimes, she would look up to find him watching her with an expression she could not quite read. One evening, Desba invited Sarah to her hogan for a meal. It was the first time the matriarch had extended such an invitation, and Sarah understood it was significant. She dressed carefully, braiding her auburn hair in a style she had seen some of the younger women wear. Desba served mutton stew and fry bread, and they ate in silence for a time. Then the older woman spoke. "You have adapted well. Many whites would have fled or demanded we change our ways to suit them. You have done neither." Sarah set down her bowl. "I am grateful to be here. Your people saved my life as much as I saved Keem and Ahiga's. I would be in Garrett's hands by now if you had turned me away." Desba studied her for a long moment. "My grandson watches you. Keem. He has not looked at a woman that way since his wife died 3 years ago." Sarah felt her cheeks heat. "I did not know he had been married." Desba nodded slowly. "She died in childbirth, along with the baby. He has carried that grief like a stone ever since. But when he looks at you, I see something else. Something lighter." Sarah did not know what to say. She was aware of her own growing feelings for Keem, feelings that seemed impossible and foolish. She was an outsider, a white woman in a Navajo community, someone whose presence brought danger to everyone around her. What right did she have to think of anything beyond simple survival? But Desba continued, as if reading her thoughts. "I am telling you this not to encourage or discourage you, but so you understand. If something grows between you and Keem, it will not be easy. Our people will question it. Some will oppose it strongly. And the white world," she gestured vaguely toward the horizon, "will judge you both harshly." Sarah met the older woman's eyes. "I understand. And I would never do anything to cause Keem more pain. He has suffered enough." Desba's expression softened slightly. "That is why I tell you this now. Because I see you care about the consequences of your actions, about the people around you. That is rare, child. In any world." They finished the meal in comfortable silence, and when Sarah left, she felt as if she had passed some invisible test. 2 months after Sarah's arrival, word came that Garrett had been seen in the territorial capital, speaking with the marshal and the military commander. He was claiming that the Navajo were harboring a dangerous fugitive, a white woman who had attempted to murder 2 innocent businessmen. He demanded that troops be sent to retrieve her. Keem called a council meeting, and though Sarah was not Navajo, they allowed her to attend. She stood at the edge of the gathering circle as Keem, Desba, and the other elders debated what to do. Some argued for sending Sarah away, for not risking the settlement's safety over one outsider. Others, particularly those whose families had been helped by Sarah in various ways over the past weeks, argued that abandoning her would be dishonorable. Finally, Keem stood. His voice carried across the gathering, strong and clear. "Sarah Brennan could have ridden past when my brother and I faced death. She had every reason to stay safe, to keep to her own path. But she chose to risk everything to save 2 men she did not know. Now Garrett comes with lies and threats, trying to use our own government against us. Again." He paused, looking around at the assembled faces. "If we give her up, we tell every white person who would stand with us that their courage means nothing. We tell our children that honor only matters when it is convenient. I will not do that. I will stand with Sarah, and if that means standing against Garrett and the marshal, so be it." Ahiga stood next. "I stand with my brother. And with Sarah." Others rose, one by one, until more than half the gathering was on their feet. Desba, who had remained seated, finally stood as well. Then it is decided. We protect our own. And Sarah Brennan is one of ours now. The gathering dispersed, and Sarah found herself surrounded by people who had barely spoken to her before, now nodding or touching her shoulder in gestures of support. She felt overwhelmed, barely able to process that these people, who had every reason to resent her presence, were now willing to risk conflict with the authorities to keep her safe. As the crowd thinned, Keem approached her. "Walk with me," he said quietly. They moved away from the settlement, climbing a low ridge that overlooked the valley. The sun was setting, painting everything in shades of gold and crimson. For a long time, they stood in silence, watching the light fade. "You should not have done that," Sarah finally said. "You should not risk your people for me." Keem turned to face her. "I did not do it just for you. I did it because it was right. Because I am tired of bowing to men like Garrett, men who think they can take whatever they want and destroy whoever opposes them." His voice was intense, passionate. "All my life, I have watched my people be pushed and diminished, told we are less than, that our ways are wrong. I will not let them make me believe that anymore." Sarah felt tears prick her eyes. "I wish I had your courage. All I have done is run from one place to another, trying to escape the consequences of standing up." Keem reached out and gently touched her face, his fingers tracing the line of her jaw. "You have more courage than you know. You are here, are you not? Still standing, still fighting. That takes strength." The touch sent electricity through her, and Sarah found herself leaning closer. "Keem," she started, but did not know how to finish. He seemed to understand anyway. His other hand came up to cup her face, his dark eyes searching hers. "Tell me to stop and I will," he said softly. "Tell me this is wrong and I will walk away." But Sarah could not say those words. Instead, she rose on her toes and kissed him, pouring weeks of loneliness and longing and fear into that contact. Keem responded immediately, pulling her closer, his hands moving to her back. They clung to each other as the last light faded from the sky, two people who had found something unexpected in the midst of danger and uncertainty. When they finally broke apart, both breathing hard, Keem rested his forehead against hers. "This will be complicated," he murmured. "I know," Sarah replied. "I do not care." He smiled then, the first genuine smile she had seen from him. "Neither do I." They walked back to the settlement hand in hand, and if anyone noticed, no one commented. But Sarah felt the weight of watching eyes, felt the complex mix of acceptance and doubt from the people around them. She knew Desba had been right. This path would not be easy. The next weeks passed in a strange limbo. Sarah and Keem grew closer, stealing moments together when work allowed. He taught her to ride in the Navajo style, to track animals by their signs, to read the weather in the clouds. She taught him to read English better, sharing the few books she had managed to keep, discussing ideas and philosophies until late into the night. Ahiga watched their courtship with obvious approval, often making excuses to leave them alone together. But the shadow of Garrett's threat hung over everything. Scouts brought word that soldiers were indeed being assembled, that the marshal was gathering a posse of hired guns. It was only a matter of time before they came. Keem worked tirelessly to prepare the settlement's defenses. Not walls or fortifications, but plans for evacuation, for hiding the vulnerable, for defending key approaches if it came to fighting. He met with the other men of fighting age, coordinating their meager weapons and strategies. Sarah watched him carry this burden and wished desperately that she could lift some of the weight from his shoulders. One night, unable to sleep, she found him sitting alone near the central fire. She sat beside him, not speaking, just offering her presence. After a while, Keem spoke. "I keep thinking about my wife. About how I failed to protect her." The words were heavy with old pain. Sarah reached for his hand. "You did not fail her. Some things cannot be fought or prevented, no matter how strong we are. Keem shook his head. I tell myself that, but the guilt remains. And now, with you, I fear it happening again. I fear I will lose someone else. He stopped, the word love hanging unspoken between them. Sarah squeezed his hand. Then we will face that fear together. And we will fight to make sure it does not come to pass. Keem looked at her, and in the firelight, she saw both his vulnerability and his strength. I love you, Sarah Brennan. I did not expect to, did not think I could again, but I do. Sarah felt her heart swell. I love you too, Keem. Whatever comes, we will face it together. They sat together through the night, drawing strength from each other's presence, preparing themselves for the storm they knew was coming. The soldiers and Marshall's posse arrived on a blazing hot day in late August. Sarah was working with several other women when the call went up. She dropped her tools and ran to where Keem stood at the edge of the settlement, watching a column of riders approach. There were at least 30 men, a mixture of cavalry soldiers and hired guns, with Garrett and the marshal at their head. Everyone to the main gathering place, Keem called out. The plan they had prepared went into effect. The children and elderly moved to the center of the settlement, surrounded by the strongest fighters. Sarah moved to stand with them, but Keem caught her arm. No. You stand with us. You are one of our warriors. Sarah felt pride and terror mix in her chest as she took her place beside him and Ahiga, the three of them forming the first line of defense. The riders stopped 50 yards out. The marshal, a fat man with a drooping mustache, called out. We are here for the fugitive Sarah Brennan. She is wanted for attempted murder. Hand her over and there will be no trouble. Garrett sat beside him, his face twisted in a satisfied sneer. Keem stepped forward. Sarah Brennan is under our protection. She committed no crime except stopping an act of violence. You will not take her. The marshal's face reddened. You do not have authority to refuse a lawful order. Stand aside or we will take her by force and burn this settlement to the ground. Sarah felt sick. They were willing to destroy everything because of her. She started to move forward, to give herself up, but Keem's hand shot out and held her back. His voice was steel. Do not. We stand together, remember? She nodded, fighting back tears, and stayed in place. Garrett could not contain himself any longer. That is her right there. Just arrest her and let us be done with this. The marshal nodded to his men, and the soldiers began to advance, weapons ready. The Navajo fighters raised their own weapons, far fewer and mostly older rifles and bows, but their faces were set with determination. Wait, a voice called out. An older cavalry officer, separate from the main group, rode forward. His uniform marked him as a captain, and his weathered face bore the marks of someone who had seen too many conflicts. What is the real charge against this woman? The marshal blustered. She shot 2 men in cold blood. The captain turned his horse to face Garrett. And what were you and your partner doing when she shot you? Garrett's face went purple. That is none of your concern. The captain's voice was cold. I am making it my concern. I have heard stories about you, Garrett. About your land schemes and your methods. The captain looked back at the Navajo settlement, at Sarah standing with Keem. If this woman shot you while you were threatening innocent people, that sounds like justified defense to me. The marshal sputtered. Captain, you are out of line. The captain smiled grimly. Perhaps. But I will not lead my men to destroy a peaceful settlement over the wounded pride of a criminal. He turned his horse to face his soldiers. Any man who draws his weapon here will answer to me personally. Garrett cursed and went for his own gun. Keem moved faster, his rifle up and aimed before Garrett could clear leather. Do not, Keem said quietly. I will not miss this time. The tableau held, 30 armed men facing down a settlement of families, all balanced on a knife's edge. Then the captain spoke again. Marshal, I suggest we return to town and investigate these charges more thoroughly. I believe we may have been misled about the nature of this situation. The marshal, seeing his military support evaporate, had no choice. He wheeled his horse around. "This is not over," he shouted. Garrett, seething with rage, followed. Most of the posse trailed after them, though a few lingered, clearly questioning what they had been told. The captain remained a moment longer. He nodded to Keem, then to Sarah. "Miss, I suggest you stay out of sight for a while. Things have a way of changing, but slowly." Then he led his soldiers away, leaving dust and confusion in their wake. As the riders disappeared over the ridge, the settlement erupted in relieved shouts and embraces. Sarah felt her legs buckle, and Keem caught her. "It is over," he said. "For now, at least." She buried her face in his chest, shaking with delayed shock. "We survived. Together." Keem held her tight. "Yes. Together." But even as the celebration went on around them, Sarah knew this was not truly over. Garrett would not forget, and the marshal would seek revenge for being humiliated. They had won today, but the war was far from finished. That night, the settlement held a feast. Food was shared, stories told, and for the first time, Sarah was included fully in the celebration. She sat beside Keem at the central fire, his hand in hers, no longer hiding their connection. Desba approached them, her lined face serious but not unkind. "You have brought change to us, Sarah Brennan. Not all change is welcome, but yours has reminded us of our strength." She looked at Keem. "You have chosen well, grandson. Do not squander this gift." Keem bowed his head respectfully. "I will not, grandmother. I promise you that." As the fire burned low and people began to drift to their homes, Ahiga sat down on Sarah's other side. "Sister," he said, using the Navajo word for the first time. Sarah felt tears spring to her eyes at the acceptance in that simple word. "Brother," she replied, her pronunciation still clumsy but heartfelt. Ahiga grinned. "You still speak like you have rocks in your mouth, but you are learning." He grew more serious. "Thank you. For standing with us. For standing with my brother. He deserves happiness after all he has lost." Sarah squeezed his shoulder. "So do you. You are a good man, Ahiga. Your people are lucky to have you." He ducked his head, embarrassed but pleased. Later, Keem walked Sarah back to her hogan. They stood outside in the cool night air, neither wanting to separate. "Stay with me tonight," Sarah said quietly. "Just to sleep. I need to know you are close." Keem searched her face, then nodded. "I need that too." They lay together on the blankets, fully clothed, simply holding each other in the darkness. Sarah listened to Keem's heartbeat, steady and strong, and felt safe for the first time since she had ridden away from that mining station months before. This place, these people, this man, they had become her home in a way Pennsylvania never had. Whatever challenges lay ahead, she knew she had found where she belonged. The autumn came with cooler temperatures and changing colors on the distant mountains. Sarah and Keem's relationship deepened, becoming an accepted part of settlement life. They spoke of marriage in the Navajo tradition, and Desba began teaching Sarah the ceremonies and meanings behind the union. It would be a blending of their two worlds, she explained, and not everyone would approve, but that did not make it less sacred. But as October arrived, so did troubling news. Garrett had left the territory, but not in defeat. He had gone to the territorial capital, filing formal charges against the entire settlement, claiming they were harboring fugitives and interfering with federal law. Worse, he had found sympathetic ears in the government, officials who saw an opportunity to seize more native land. A new marshal arrived, one not in Garrett's pocket but also not sympathetic to the Navajo. He announced that Sarah must stand trial, that the settlement could not simply ignore the law. But he also promised that if she turned herself in, the settlement would be left alone. If she did not, he would be forced to bring charges against those sheltering her. Keem wanted to fight, to refuse, but Sarah knew what she had to do. She went to him that evening and took his hands. "I have to go. I have to face this. It is the only way to protect everyone here." Keem shook his head violently. "No. We will leave together, go somewhere they cannot find us. We will start over." Sarah cupped his face gently. "And live our whole lives running? Always looking over our shoulders? That is not living, Keem. That is just slow dying." She kissed him softly. "I have to do this. But I need you to promise me something. Promise you will wait for me. Promise you will not do anything rash. Let me face this properly, through the law, and trust that justice will prevail." Keem's eyes were anguished. "What if it does not? What if they convict you?" "Then you will know I faced it with courage," Sarah replied. "You will know I did not let fear rule me. And you will go on, live your life, honor what we have had. Do not let anger and revenge consume you." They held each other through the night, neither sleeping, both memorizing every detail of the other. At dawn, Sarah dressed in her old traveling clothes, the ones she had arrived in. They fit strangely now, after months of different work and different life. She felt like she was putting on a costume of who she used to be. The entire settlement gathered to see her off. Desba gave her a woven blanket, colors bright and patterns intricate. "Carry this with you. Remember that you have family here, always." Ahiga pressed a small medicine pouch into her hand. "For protection. Come back to us, sister." Sarah promised she would try. Keem rode with her to the edge of Navajo land, where the new marshal waited with 2 deputies. They did not speak much during that ride, both too full of emotion for words. At the boundary, Keem finally broke the silence. "I will come to the trial. I will testify about what happened, about why you did what you did." Sarah nodded. "Good. Tell them the truth. That is all we can do." She dismounted and prepared to turn her horse over to the deputies. But before she could, Keem pulled her into one last fierce embrace. "I love you, Sarah Brennan. Nothing that happens will change that. Wait for me," she whispered back. "I will return to you. I swear it." Then she pulled away, straightened her shoulders, and walked toward the waiting lawmen, toward an uncertain future, but with her head held high. The trial was held in the territorial capital, a growing town that tried hard to seem civilized and modern. Sarah was placed in a cell, not chained but clearly imprisoned. The conditions were not terrible, but the isolation was crushing. She had grown so used to the constant presence of people, to communal living, that being alone in the cell felt like suffocation. A lawyer was appointed to defend her, a young man fresh from law school back east. His name was Thomas Walsh, and he seemed earnest but overwhelmed. "I will be honest, Miss Brennan," he said during their first meeting. "The charges against you are serious. Assault with intent to kill. And the testimony will be against you, from men who are considered respected businessmen." But Sarah told him everything, about finding the brothers bound and threatened, about Garrett's brutality, about having no choice but to act. Walsh listened carefully, taking notes. "Then we will argue justifiable defense of others. It is a difficult case, but not impossible." The trial began in early November. The courtroom was packed, with curious townsfolk mixing with Garrett supporters and a small group of Navajo, including Keem, Ahiga, and Desba, who had made the long journey to support Sarah. She felt strength flow into her when she saw them, felt less alone. The prosecution presented their case first. Garrett testified that he and Denton had been engaged in legitimate business negotiations with 2 native guides when Sarah had burst in and shot them without provocation. His lies were smooth and convincing, delivered with the practiced ease of a man used to manipulating truth. Denton, his arm still bandaged, corroborated every detail. Then it was the defense's turn. Walsh called Keem to the stand. Keem testified about what had really happened, about the beatings and threats, about Sarah's courage in facing armed men to save strangers. His testimony was powerful and honest, and Sarah saw some members of the jury shift uncomfortably. But the prosecution tore into him on cross-examination, implying he would say anything to protect the white woman he was involved with, suggesting his testimony was tainted by emotion. Ahiga testified next, backing up his brother's account. Then Walsh made a bold move, calling the cavalry captain who had prevented the attack on the settlement. The captain testified that based on what he had observed and what he knew of Garrett's reputation, he believed Sarah had acted to prevent a crime, not commit one. The prosecution objected strenuously, but the judge allowed the testimony to stand. Finally, Sarah herself took the stand. Walsh guided her through her story, and she spoke clearly and honestly about everything that had happened. She did not try to make herself sound heroic. She simply told the truth, about hearing the cries, about being unable to ride past, about the fear and desperation of that moment when she had fired her derringer. "I am not proud of hurting anyone," she said quietly. "But I could not let those men die. I could not be the person who heard suffering and did nothing." The prosecution's cross-examination was brutal. They attacked her character, bringing up her dismissal from the academy in Philadelphia, suggesting she had a pattern of interfering in matters that did not concern her. They implied improper relations with Keem, suggesting her judgment was clouded by base desires. Sarah endured it all, answering each question as honestly as she could, refusing to be baited into anger or tears. When both sides had rested, the judge gave his instructions to the jury. They deliberated for 2 full days. Sarah spent those days in her cell, praying, trying to prepare herself for whatever verdict came. Keem was not allowed to visit her, but Desba came, sitting quietly with her, offering the comfort of presence without empty reassurances. On the 3rd day, the jury returned. Sarah stood as they filed in, trying to read their faces and finding nothing. The foreman stood, a weathered rancher whose expression gave away nothing. "We the jury, in the matter of the Territory versus Sarah Brennan, find the defendant not guilty of assault with intent to kill." The courtroom erupted. Garrett was on his feet, screaming about injustice and corruption. The judge's gavel hammered for order. But Sarah heard none of it. She felt her knees buckle, felt Walsh catch her arm, heard him saying congratulations over and over. Then Keem was there, having pushed through the crowd, pulling her into his arms. She clung to him, finally allowing herself to cry, to release all the fear and tension she had been holding. "It is over," he murmured into her hair. "You are free. We can go home." The word home settled into her heart like a key finding its lock. "Yes," she whispered. "Let us go home." But it was not quite over. As they prepared to leave the courthouse, Garrett blocked their path, his face purple with rage. "This is not finished," he snarled. "I will make sure you pay for this, both of you. I will see that settlement burned to the ground and every savage in it dead or scattered." Keem's hand moved to his knife, but Sarah grabbed his arm. "He is not worth it," she said firmly. "He is nothing now, just a bitter man screaming into the wind." Garrett lunged forward, but the marshal and his deputies were there, pulling him back. "You are done here, Garrett," the marshal said coldly. "Take your hatred and leave, or I will find charges to bring against you. Turns out there are quite a few people with stories about your business dealings." Garrett struggled a moment more, then spat at their feet and stormed out. Sarah watched him go, feeling nothing but pity for a man so consumed by greed and hate that he had destroyed himself. The journey back to the settlement took a week. Sarah rode beside Keem, with Ahiga and Desba completing their small party. They did not hurry, instead taking time to simply be together, to talk about the future, to heal from the trauma of the trial. One evening, as they made camp beside a small stream, Keem took Sarah's hand. I want to marry you, he said. Properly, in the Navajo way, with all the ceremonies. I want everyone to know that you are my wife, that we are bound together. Sarah felt joy bloom in her chest. Yes, she said simply. Yes, I want that too. Desba smiled from across the fire. Then when we return, we will begin preparations. It will be a good wedding, a celebration of two people who have earned their happiness. Ahiga raised a tin cup in a mock toast. And I will finally have a sister who can teach me to read all those big English words. They laughed together under the stars, for people who had become a family through trial and choice. They arrived back at the settlement on a clear December morning. The entire community turned out to welcome them, and Sarah found herself embraced and congratulated by people who months before had viewed her with suspicion. She had proven herself, not just in the dramatic rescue, but in the quieter ways, through work and perseverance and commitment to the community's well-being. The wedding preparations began immediately. Sarah learned the traditional Navajo marriage customs under Desba's patient instruction. There would be 2 ceremonies, one in the Navajo tradition and one incorporating elements of Sarah's Christian background, a true blending of their 2 worlds. She worked with the other women to prepare the wedding dress, traditional Navajo style but with small touches of lace from her old life. Keem, meanwhile, worked with the men to build an addition to his hogan, creating space for them to start their life together. Sarah watched him work, his strong hands shaping wood and stone, and felt overwhelming gratitude for this man who had become her anchor, her home. The wedding took place on a cold but clear day in late December. Sarah wore the dress the women had created, her auburn hair braided with traditional ornaments. Keem wore ceremonial clothing, his long black hair loose around his shoulders. They stood before the community, before Desba who officiated, and spoke their vows. In Navajo, Keem promised to protect and honor her, to walk beside her through all seasons of life. In English, Sarah promised the same, her voice strong and clear. Then, at Desba's instruction, they shared corn mush from a wedding basket, symbolizing the combining of their lives. The ceremony concluded with prayers and blessings, and as the community celebrated, Sarah felt more married, more bound to Keem, than any church ceremony could have made her feel. The feast lasted into the night, with food and music and dancing. Sarah danced with Keem, with Ahiga, even with some of the elders who had initially opposed her presence. And when the celebration finally wound down and they retired to their expanded hogan, Sarah looked around at the space they had created together and felt complete. Keem pulled her close, his hand gentle on her face. "My wife," he said, testing the word. Sarah smiled. "My husband." They came together then, expressing physically what they had felt for months, the love and desire that had grown between them. And in the warmth of their marriage bed, with the sounds of the celebration dying outside, they truly became one. The winter passed peacefully. Sarah settled into her role as Keem's wife, continuing her work in the community but also taking on new responsibilities. She helped Desba with healing work, learning the properties of various herbs and remedies. Her skill with reading and writing proved valuable as well, as she helped community members draft letters and understand official documents that arrived from the territorial government. Spring brought new challenges. Reports reached them that Garrett had died, his heart giving out during a drunken rage at a saloon in Santa Fe. Sarah felt no satisfaction in his death, only relief that his vendetta had died with him. But the threat he represented, the larger forces of expansion and displacement, remained. More settlers were moving into the territory, and pressure was building on the Navajo to cede more land. Keem and the other leaders spent long hours in council, trying to navigate the complex politics of survival. Sarah sat in on these meetings now, her perspective as someone who understood both worlds proving valuable. One evening, as spring turned toward summer, Sarah realized she had missed her monthly courses. She waited another month to be sure, then went to Desba with her suspicion. The old woman examined her, then smiled broadly. "You carry new life, granddaughter. A child will come in the autumn." Sarah felt joy and terror in equal measure. She was going to be a mother. She and Keem were going to have a child. When she told Keem, he was speechless for a moment, then swept her up in his arms, spinning her around. His eyes were wet with tears. A child, he kept saying. We are going to have a child. That night, they lay together talking about their hopes and fears, about what kind of parents they wanted to be, about the world they were bringing this child into. The pregnancy progressed smoothly through the summer. Sarah continued working, though the other women insisted she take it easier as she grew larger. Keem was attentive to the point of being overprotective, constantly checking on her, bringing her water, trying to do her share of the work. She found it both endearing and occasionally frustrating. Ahiga was thrilled about becoming an uncle. He had recently begun courting a young woman from a neighboring settlement, and he confided in Sarah that he hoped to follow his brother's example, to find the kind of partnership they had built. Sarah hugged him, telling him he deserved all the happiness in the world. As autumn approached and Sarah's belly grew large, Desba began preparing for the birth. She gathered the items they would need, instructed Sarah on what to expect, and assembled the women who would help with the delivery. Sarah tried not to think about Keem's first wife, about how she had died in childbirth, but the fear was there, unspoken but present. One night, Keem held her close and finally spoke about it. I am terrified, he admitted. I cannot lose you, Sarah. I cannot survive that again. Sarah took his face in her hands. You are not going to lose me. I am strong, the baby is strong, and Desba knows what she is doing. Have faith. But she understood his fear, because she felt it too. The labor began on a cool October morning, almost exactly a year after Sarah had first arrived at the settlement. The contractions started slowly, then built in intensity through the day. Sarah labored through the afternoon and into the evening, Desba and the other women supporting her, guiding her breathing, encouraging her. Keem waited outside with Ahiga and the other men, pacing like a caged animal. Every cry that escaped the Hogan made him flinch, made him want to burst in, though he knew there was nothing he could do. Ahiga stayed close, a steadying presence, reminding him to breathe, to trust. As midnight approached, the baby finally came. A girl, strong and loud, with a thick head of black hair. Desba cleaned her quickly, then placed her in Sarah's exhausted arms. Perfect, Sarah whispered, counting tiny fingers and toes. She is perfect. Desba stepped outside and called to Keem. You have a daughter. Come meet her. Keem practically ran into the Hogan. He fell to his knees beside Sarah, staring at the tiny life they had created. She is beautiful, he breathed. Like her mother. Sarah smiled tiredly. She has your hair. And I think she is going to have your stubbornness. They decided to name her Nala, a Navajo name meaning beloved. Keem held his daughter for the first time, and Sarah saw his face transform with love and wonder. All the old pain, all the grief he had carried, seemed to lighten in that moment. This was not replacing what he had lost, but it was healing, a new chapter beginning. The settlement celebrated the birth with joy. Nala became the center of attention, passed from person to person, blessed and welcomed into the community. Sarah recovered quickly, her strength returning day by day. And as she watched Keem with their daughter, saw how gentle and devoted he was, she felt her heart could not possibly hold more love. The months that followed were exhausting and wonderful in equal measure. Nala was a healthy, demanding baby who kept them up at all hours. Sarah learned to nurse her, to soothe her cries, to interpret the different sounds she made. Keem changed from fierce warrior to doting father, singing Navajo lullabies, carrying Nala everywhere in a cradleboard, showing her off to anyone who would look. Ahiga married his sweetheart that spring, in a ceremony that reminded Sarah of her own wedding. She stood beside Desba, watching her brother-in-law pledge himself to his new wife, and felt the continuation of family, of life moving forward. Desba, now a great-grandmother, seemed to grow more serene with each passing season, her wisdom deepening. As Nala's first birthday approached, Sarah reflected on the incredible journey that had brought her here. 3 years ago, she had been a widow fleeing her past, angry at a world that seemed determined to punish those who stood up for what was right. Now she had a husband she loved deeply, a daughter who was the light of her life, and a community that had become her true family. There were still challenges. The pressure on Navajo land continued, and there were constant negotiations with the territorial government. But Sarah and Keem faced these challenges together, drawing on their combined perspectives and strengths. Sarah used her education and understanding of white bureaucracy to help navigate legal documents and political maneuvering. Keem brought his deep knowledge of the land and his people's needs. Together, they became advocates, not just for their own settlement but for other native communities facing similar pressures. They traveled occasionally to the territorial capital, speaking to officials, building alliances with sympathetic voices. It was slow, frustrating work, but occasionally they won small victories, managed to protect parcels of land, to prevent the worst abuses. One evening, as they sat outside their hogan watching Nala toddle around on unsteady legs, Keem pulled Sarah close. "Do you ever regret it?" he asked quietly. "Leaving your old life, everything you knew?" Sarah considered the question seriously, then shook her head. "Not for a moment. My old life was comfortable but empty. This," she gestured to Nala, to the settlement around them, to Keem himself, "this is real. This matters." Keem kissed her temple. "I am grateful every day that you were brave enough to stop that day at the mining station. That you chose to see us as human beings worth saving." Sarah smiled. "And I am grateful you gave me a home when I needed one, that you saw me as a person worth knowing. We saved each other, I think." As the sun set and painted the sky in brilliant colors, Sarah felt profound contentment. Her life had not turned out anything like she had planned or expected. It had been harder, more frightening, more uncertain. But it had also been richer, more meaningful, more full of genuine love and purpose than anything she could have imagined. Nala stumbled and fell, immediately looking to her parents. Sarah scooped her up, kissing her chubby cheek, while Keem tickled her until she giggled. They went inside together, the small family unit, and Sarah lit the lamps while Keem started preparing the evening meal. It was ordinary, domestic, and utterly precious. The years continued to pass. Nala grew into a bright, spirited child who spoke both Navajo and English fluently, who learned her people's traditions while also hearing stories of her mother's Eastern upbringing. She had her father's dark eyes and her mother's fierce independence, and she was loved beyond measure by everyone in the settlement. When Nala was 4, Sarah found herself pregnant again. This time there was less fear, more confidence. Their son was born in early spring, and they named him Dakota, meaning friend to everyone. He was a calmer baby than Nala had been, content to watch the world with solemn eyes. Keem now had both a daughter and a son, and his joy was complete. Desba lived to see both great-grandchildren, to hold them and bless them. She died peacefully in her sleep one winter night, having seen her family grow and thrive, having witnessed the unlikely but beautiful union of her grandson and the white woman who had changed all their lives. Her passing was mourned deeply, but there was also celebration of a life well lived, of wisdom passed down. Sarah took on more of the elder women's responsibilities after Desba's death, teaching younger women, helping to settle disputes, offering counsel. She had earned the respect that came not from her dramatic arrival but from years of consistent presence and genuine care for the community. She was no longer the outsider she had been. She was simply Sarah, Keem's wife, mother to Nala and Dakota, teacher and healer. Ahiga and his wife had children of their own, and the cousins grew up together, a new generation that embodied the blending of traditions and the strength of family bonds. Ahiga remained close to Sarah and Keem, the three of them still the core unit that had faced down Garrett years before. They would sometimes tell the story to the children, carefully edited, explaining how their family had come to be. The territorial tensions eventually eased somewhat. New leadership in the government proved more willing to negotiate fairly, to recognize native land rights. The settlement's borders were formally recognized, protecting them from future encroachment. It was not perfect, and threats remained, but it was progress, the kind of slow change that came from years of patient advocacy and refusing to give up. On Sarah's 40th birthday, Keem organized a celebration. The entire settlement gathered, along with friends from neighboring communities. There was food and music and dancing, and as Sarah looked around at the life they had built, at the children playing, at the community thriving, she felt overwhelming gratitude. Keem found her standing slightly apart, watching the celebration. He wrapped his arms around her from behind, and they stood together in comfortable silence. "I have been thinking about that day," he said. "The day you burst into the mining station. How different everything would be if you had ridden past." Sarah leaned back against him. "I could not have ridden past. It was not in me to ignore suffering. Even then, before I knew you, before any of this, I could not have made that choice." "I know," Keem replied. "That is who you are. That is why I love you." Sarah turned in his arms to face him. "And you," she said, "are the man who gave me a place to belong when the whole world seemed set against me. Who loved me despite all the complications. Who gave me a family." Keem smiled, the lines around his eyes deepening. "We built this together. All of it." They kissed, still deeply in love after all the years, all the challenges overcome. Nala ran up, now a young woman of 14, beautiful and fierce. "Mother, father, come dance with us." She grabbed their hands and pulled them back to the celebration. Sarah allowed herself to be led, laughing, feeling young despite the gray threading through her auburn hair. She danced with her daughter, with her son who was growing tall, with Ahiga and his family, with Keem who still moved with the same grace that had first caught her eye. As the celebration wound down and stars emerged overhead, Sarah sat by the fire with Keem's arm around her. Their children were nearby, Nala telling stories to the younger kids while Dakota practiced with a bow under Ahiga's watchful eye. This was her life. Not the one she had been born to, not the one she had planned, but the one she had fought for, chosen, built from nothing but courage and love. The fire crackled, sending sparks up into the night sky. Somewhere in the distance, a coyote called, and another answered. The sounds of the settlement settling in for the night created a peaceful symphony. Sarah closed her eyes, breathing in the scent of wood smoke and prairie grass, feeling Keem's steady heartbeat against her side. She thought about the frightened widow she had been, riding through unfamiliar territory, carrying pain and regret. She thought about the moment she had heard those cries and made a choice that changed everything. She thought about all the small moments since then, the daily choices to stay, to work, to love, to build a life in a place that had not welcomed her but that she had made home through sheer determination. Tomorrow would bring new challenges. There would be more negotiations with authorities, more work to do, children to raise, a community to help sustain. But tonight, Sarah was exactly where she belonged, surrounded by family, by love, by the life she had claimed for herself. Keem pressed a kiss to her hair. "What are you thinking about?" he asked quietly. "Everything," Sarah replied. "How it all led here. How grateful I am." Keem tightened his arm around her. "I am grateful too. Every day." They sat together as the fire burned low, as their children came to join them, as the night deepened around their small family. And Sarah knew, with absolute certainty, that she would make the same choices again. Every risk, every moment of fear, every challenge faced. Because it had brought her here, to this place, to these people, to this love. The stars wheeled overhead, the same stars that had watched her ride into the unknown years before, the same stars that had witnessed every moment of joy and struggle since. Under their ancient light, Sarah Brennan, who had once been lost, was finally and completely found. The settlement slept peacefully that night, its people secure in the knowledge that they were protected, not by walls or weapons, but by the bonds of community and the fierce love of people who had chosen each other. And in the morning, when the sun rose again over the land, Sarah would wake beside Kim, would gather her children, would begin another day in the life they had built together. A life that proved that courage and compassion could overcome hatred, that love could bridge any divide, that home was not where you were born but where you chose to stand and fight for what mattered. The story of Sarah and Kim would be told for generations, passed down as a reminder that sometimes the most important moment of your life is when you hear someone in need and choose not to ride past. That justice is worth fighting for, that family is what you make it, and that the strongest foundations are built not on similarity but on mutual respect, shared values, and the willingness to stand together against whatever storms may come.